Debts and liabilities are going to be something that needs to be divided, so it's important that you understand how they're divided. Just like your assets, your debts and your liabilities are treated the same in terms of marital versus non-marital. So if you had debts that were brought into the marriage, chances are those are going to be considered non-marital debts. Debts acquired during the marriage are considered marital property under most circumstances. So in other words, we're going to look at it and we're going to divide it equitably. Simply because a credit card's in your name or your spouse's name does not mean they're responsible for that debt. Title alone does not determine who is responsible for the debt. The court is going to look at your debts and your liabilities and allocate them equitably. I'm often asked if I'm responsible for my spouse's debts. My answer is depends. It depends upon what those are for. When were they acquired and what are they for? If they're acquired during the marriage, chances are it's a marital debt. The court's going to treat it like any other asset out there, and it's going to figure out what makes the most sense. Now, there are some things that simply go with the other. For example, if there's a debt associated with the vehicle and you're keeping the vehicle, chances are you're going to also pay the loan associated with it. If it's a student loan tied to you individually, courts are typically going to say that's your debt, you're going to pay for it. Now, there are some circumstances where the court can consider a variety of factors and have parties pay for the other's liabilities, but it's really fact specific. The reality is there's not a one size fits all. It's going to come down to your unique circumstances as to who's responsible for what debts. Dissipation is one of the few times that we actually look at conduct. As a no-fault divorce state, we don't get involved in who caused the divorce, but dissipation is one time where we will actually look at the actions of one party and potentially say that's going to impact how we're dividing things. So for example, dissipation is where you spend marital money on a non-marital purpose. The classic example would be having an affair. If you just found out that your spouse has a significant other and was taking marital money and spending it on that significant other, you might be entitled to a claim of dissipation. For example, if we found out that they were taking them on a cruise, they bought jewelry for the other person, and you now found that they were taking marital money and spending it on this other person, you can file a claim of dissipation. This means that you can write down all the transactions that you believe were spent on this other person, and they have to come up with an explanation as to what they did with that money. If the court finds that they were spending it on a non-marital purpose, we will take that money and essentially add it back in as though it was part of the marital estate. Let me break that down just a little bit further. Let's say you found out your spouse was having an affair, and you allege that they spent $20,000 on this significant other. Let's say there's $200,000 of marital assets to divide. What we would then do is take that $20,000 and pretend it was back in that marital pile. So now the court would treat it as though there's $220,000 to divide. And then depending on how the court's ultimately dividing up the assets, let's say it was 50-50. So in a 50-50 division, each person would have $110,000. However, we realized that your spouse already got $20,000. So what they would do, the court would look at this and say, they already got their portion. We're going to pretend as though they got their portion, and we're going to give the other spouse more money. So in other words, an extra $10,000 would go to you because they already spent their money on that significant other. Now, this is an oversimplification. It's important you talk with the lawyer about your specifics so we can make sure that it's addressed the right way for you. What do you do if your spouse is hiding property? Well, this is a really complicated issue because I always tell people it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. We've talked about discovery tools and how those can help you to find things. And if you can't find the assets, even after conducting all this discovery, what do? Well, you have to do the best you can to try to piece together what you're trying to say. In other words, if you believe that somebody's hiding assets, maybe they're giving it to another person, do we have any sort of paper trail that would support that? You see, if we don't have any facts or evidence to support our claims, it's kind of your word against theirs. So it's a really tough situation, and we have to figure out what can we do to find that information. So if they're taking marital money and just spending it on a non-marital purpose in a way that dissipated the marital assets, you can file a claim of dissipation. But if your spouse is hiding assets, I would encourage you to exercise all discovery options to make sure you've done all your due diligence to find that information. So if it does later surface, you could potentially come back into court and ask for it to be addressed at a later date and time.